Good morning and welcome back to another episode of Soul Medication. We are working our way verse by verse through the first chapter of James, and we're going to start with verse 12 today. Blessed is a man who endures trials, because when he passes the test, he will receive the crown of life that he has promised to those who love him. No one undergoing a trial should say, I am being tempted by God, for God is not tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when he's drawn away and enticed by his own evil desires. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death. Remember on Monday, James wrote about suffering and how, as Christians, we are encouraged in verse 2 to consider it a great joy when we experience various trials. Now, here in verses 12 to 15, we are told that when we are tempted, and side note, James, remember here is that this is another son that grew up in the household of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And James knew Jesus as a brother. So he writes, when you are tempted, it is not God. He knew God could not be tempted by evil, and he knew that God himself does not tempt anyone. So, if God does not tempt me, and I could very well consider it temptation when I'm in the middle of a trial, then James is saying our temptations rise out of our own evil desires, basically, what our flesh wants. So think about it. You're struggling, whatever your suffering is, we are told to be joyful. But I'll be honest, I don't necessarily feel like being joyful. Most of the time, I want to be miserable. And when I'm going through these situations, I have to be very careful on getting enough rest, making sure I'm getting my sleep. A lot of times these things will keep you up at night. Making sure that I'm eating a healthy diet. When you are miserable, what do? We go for the comfort food. What is comfort food? It's laden with processed foods and chemicals, things that alter your cognitive ability, that alter your metabolism, how you feel. So, because it is so hard to hold your head up, not be drawn to sin at this time, we have to be really careful about those things. And it's important to not let the devil draw us away from the plan that God is working in our lives. In verse 14, we see the pattern that happens. There's a pattern here when we get to the desire. First, you're tempted when you are drawn away and enticed by your own evil desire. So, step one, we draw away from Jesus and this desire is conceived. Then in verse 15, we see step two, the desire gives birth to sin. Remember what the Bible says sin is. In James 4:17, it says, it is sin to know what you ought to do and then not do it. What do we know we are supposed to do? We're supposed to consider it all joy. We're supposed to consider a great joy, to be wholly joyful in various translations. When we are enveloped in or encounter various trials and temptations. Step three talks about how sin fully grows and gives birth to death. And remember, Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. If you find yourself suffering today, press in to Jesus. God is not the one tempting you. Often we'll revolt because we feel God is putting all of this on you. And so we tend to draw away. But God is not the one tempting you. He's not the author of your sin. If you have drawn away, press in even harder. Refuse to leave his side today. Meditate on some key scriptures that speak to your heart. Verse 16 says, don't be deceived, my dearly loved brothers. I find it very interesting and reassuring that James warns us of the deceiver here. Verse 17 and 18, every generous act and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights. With him there is no variation or shadow cast by turning. By his own choice, he gave us a new birth by the message of truth, so that we would be the first fruits of his creatures. There's a hymn that you can probably think about when you're reading those verses, the hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness. The first stanza goes like this: Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not. Thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever will be. I hope that you find encouragement today that God is faithful. He does not change with the rising and setting of the sun or the change of the seasons. He is a compassionate God, and He is the same God yesterday as He is today and will be tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.